Today we've got a great revenge story of ruining someone's chances of finding a new job. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, why I left my protective boyfriend. I met this 26-year-old guy, let's call him G, when I was fresh out of college. I wasn't keen on choosing a life partner at that point, but I was intrigued by the way G was so intentional about me. He was the first person who stood firm with his intention to marry me. He was all about marriage talks right from our first few months as friends. I hated to think he was bluffing, and his intentionality about ticking all my boxes only infuriated me more. It was strange, but that was what I felt. However, after about 6 months, I realized that I was just as into him as he was into me. I enjoyed how much he chased me, and if I must say so myself, he had a way of making my heart warm. I remember his first birthday we celebrated together. He spared no effort in ensuring that I had the best time. The memories of how he picked me up after work, handed me a ticket, and whisked me off to one of the most beautiful places in the world have managed to stick with me for so long. I smiled when we returned from that trip. I don't know why, but I began to feel so lucky that I had such an intentional person around. I officially agreed to be his girlfriend some weeks after my birthday. G couldn't contain his joy. He was so excited about the prospect of our relationship. As he did all his drama, all I could do was giggle and smile sheepishly. After that, we began a love story that would be etched in the core memory of my life for a long time. It was all love, roses, date nights, and a promise of forever that I could feel my heart melt under each gaze. Everything seemed cool until we began to have our trying moments. I don't know if I could label his being overly protective of me as a red flag, but I remember clearly that he hated it when other guys tried to come close to me at any point. It got so bad that I literally began to avoid all the male friends I had because I didn't want to have to settle any disputes. I knew it was wrong for me to lead such a life, but I gave excuses for him because this minute he's the sweetest, and another minute he hates to think that I would ever communicate with another boy. I saw him as crazy and unrealistic. It wasn't possible to pack off every relationship I had with members of the opposite sex because I was in a relationship with him, but he always had a way of painting it as easy. At some point, I barred him from having any access to me because I just needed to catch a breather. It took him sharing his past for me to be able to give him a look in the face. I knew there was something about him that was off, but it was so difficult for me to place it. Thankfully, he was willing to open up about how he trusted his ex for the longest time possible, only for him to get cheated on most condescendingly. According to him, he allowed his ex full access to a number of his male friends because he never saw any possibility of experiencing any betrayal from them. He didn't mind when his girlfriend interacted fully with his male buddies because he considered all of them to be one big happy family. The day he discovered that his girl had been having a thing with one of his trusted friends was the day he knew he'd been played over and over again like a fool. He had walked in on them during a birthday dinner as they were busy in an intense makeout session. According to him, 1,001 things happened to him at the same time, all of which he didn't have words for. As he stood watching the horrific scene, he knew something had leaped inside him, and he was certain that it wasn't a leap of joy. I think that was the beginning of his trust issues, and unfortunately for me, I was the recipient of his past. Soon enough, I realized that I could do so little to convince him that not every girl would treat him as his ex, but I doubted if he believed me much. I knew this because he didn't change much. At some point, I thought of ending the relationship. However, each time I felt propelled to take that decision, I was usually taken aback by his warmth, care, and the fact that he checked virtually all my boxes. I loved him. At least I got to experience love way better than the one I experienced with my ex. It was funny how that ex had a way of giving me post-traumatic stress disorder. For a long time, I kept feeling like every man along my path would treat me like my ex did. He was the first man I ever loved, and he honestly made me feel like he would be my last. I can't remember how he did it, but he took me home to meet his family in our first week of dating. Even though I was shy, he would listen to me. He was like that. He had this unique way of pushing one to do things they ordinarily would not consider. Well, when I met his family, I became glad that I did. I couldn't overlook their warmth and love for me. They were so glad to have me around, and I never had a hard time sticking around either. That was the move that propelled me to stay longer in that relationship. While my then boyfriend became so toxic and irritating, it was his family that gave me all the warmth I needed to feel. For instance, during a particular birthday dinner I put together for myself the year I turned 23, My ex managed to give all the excuses he could give in order to not show up. When he eventually did, he came very late. And it was so disgusting to listen to all the excuses he had to make to redeem himself. I remember him cooking up a story about how he was caught up at work and how he would make it up to me. That was a perfect picture of how my relationship was with my ex. My choice of such a man was so poor, but I didn't know why I managed to stick around such a huge mess. Looking back now, I feel that was the major reason why I made so many excuses for G. I guess I saw that he only had one weakness, which to me wasn't strong enough to cancel him. In my naivety, I truly believed that time would make G better as long as I kept showing him how to move on from his past. The more chance I gave him to deprive me of any relationship with the opposite sex, the more toxicity I had to put up with. I was willing to settle for less until I got a wake-up call during one of G's displays. It was a Friday night, and everything looked lucid and bland at the same time. It was a cold, wintry night, and I only had one desire that night: to stay in bed. I chose to spend the weekend at G's because I was too tired to think of the drive to my home. I just wanted to stay in bed and maybe watch Netflix and chill, or how do they say it? G was home too. He picked me up at work and he stayed home all through the evening. I had thought that we would stay home together to enjoy the cold breeze and maybe get cozy together, you know? I was half awake and half asleep when I realized that G had been trying to get me up by all means. In my drowsy state, I could hear him trying to remind me about a birthday dinner he had told me about in the course of the week. I couldn't remember if I'd consented to be a part of the birthday dinner earlier in the week, but I could see how much G wanted me to go with him. I grumbled and rumbled on the bed. I needed him to see that what mattered most to me then was the sleep I was trying to get, but he wanted something different. I knew he had mentioned the birthday dinner, but I hated to admit that I'd failed to put it on my schedule. Reluctantly, I woke up to dress for the dinner, even though I knew he wouldn't force me to if I didn't want to. I dressed up and we made it to his friend's birthday dinner just in time. While he drove there, I observed that he was a little quieter than usual, and I remember asking him if he had anything bothering him. His answers were curt, and I just had to take it that he didn't want to engage in conversations. At the dinner, everywhere popped with good vibes and everybody looked good. I just knew I was going to enjoy some good company for the night. Soon enough, I was left alone because G became so busy with helping out with some things. The birthday guy was his best friend, so I wasn't surprised when he got busy with some things. While he did what he did for his friend, I was left in the company of some girls who later left me to do only what God knew. Before they left, I had noticed that a particular guy had found it so difficult to take his eyes off me at the party. Even though I found it so awkward that he chose to stare deeply into my soul for several minutes, I couldn't deny that I admire his determination to pull that off. I mean, he made it obvious that he stared at me. When the girls left, I noticed that he moved closer to where I sat. At that point, I felt so uncomfortable. I knew that G would make a scene if he saw that guy with me. The fact that the guy was not a familiar face left me in a tighter position. Eventually, I had to move away from my seat. I could guess that the guy would find his seat beside me, and I didn't want to wait to see that happen. Music was on and a lot of people began to dance. I decided to step outside for some fresh air since I didn't want to dance. One look at my back brought me face to face with this mystery guy. He stretched his hand out in a way to get my full attention. I looked at him with my lips wide open because I was too shocked to see him right behind me. I had barely said a word to him when I heard a loud thud on the floor. In that state of frenzy, I managed to identify the attacker as G. I begged him to stop, but he wouldn't budge. It took the intervention of some guys at the party to stop G. The mystery guy lay on the floor, clueless and feeling defeated. Everyone looked at G for answers, even though we already knew the answer. I must stay clear of any other man. In that moment of fear and embarrassment, I hurriedly walked past G with so many tears in my eyes. I could hear his apologies loud and clear, but it was too late. I was tired of trying to help him heal and get better. I was tired of pushing him toward therapy. That night, I wanted to be consumed by revenge and maybe vile. But I figured that the best revenge was walking away and never looking back. I mean, I don't really know if this counts as revenge per se. I would have liked to have heard some fallout where G was so devastated over losing OP, or even something like he got charges pressed against him for assaulting that poor guy who, although maybe slightly creepy behaviors, did nothing inherently wrong. Our next story is, try to steal my lunch? You are going to get fired. My name is Alex, 37-year-old male, and I work as a data analyst at a bustling tech company. I'm a creature of habit, thriving on routines and order. Each day I start with a cup of black coffee and dive into spreadsheets and data reports. Lunchtime is my sanctuary. I always bring my favorite meal, a turkey and avocado sandwich, a small side salad, and a slice of homemade apple pie. It's my little slice of comfort amid the chaos of work. But recently, this small joy has been repeatedly stolen, and my frustration is growing. The first time my lunch went missing, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone grabbed it by accident, but as days turned into weeks, it became clear I had a persistently wicked lunch thief. Every day around noon, I'd find the fridge empty, my lunch nowhere in sight. I started labeling my food with big, bold letters, but the thefts continued. Reporting the issue to HR seemed logical, right? I did it once, twice, then over a dozen times. HR assured me that they would look into it each time, but nothing changed. Their lack of action only fueled my irritation. I tried bringing different lunches, hoping to catch the thief off guard, but it was no use. My precious meals vanished like clockwork. The sense of violation was overwhelming. It wasn't just about the food, it was about respect and boundaries. I felt helpless and invisible, my complaints falling on deaf ears. Something had to give, and soon. During a routine checkup, I found myself venting to my doctor about my relentless lunch thief. Dr. Mitchell listened patiently, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "You know," he said, "there's a rather unconventional solution you could consider. It's not exactly medical advice, but it might be effective." Intrigued, I leaned in and said, "What do you mean?" Dr. Mitchell chuckled and said, "A potent laxative. Slip it into your lunch. Who's ever stealing it will have quite the surprise." At first, I laughed it off, but the idea lingered. Could I do that? Was it too extreme? The more I thought about it, the more appealing it became. Maybe a taste of their own medicine would teach the thief a lesson. I left the clinic with a small prescription bottle and a plan forming in my mind. That evening, I stared at the prescription bottle on my kitchen counter. Could I go through with this? I thought about all the times I'd open the fridge to find my lunch gone, the frustration, the sense of violation. Yes, I could do this. I had to. I carefully prepared my lunch. A delicious chicken wrap, a small bag of chips, and a brownie. But this time I added a special ingredient to the wrap, the laxative. I wrapped everything up and labeled it clearly with my name. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Would this finally end my lunchtime woes? I packed my lunch bag with determination, ready to see this through. The next morning, I walked into work with my lunch bag, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. I placed my lunch in the fridge, making sure it was in plain sight. Then I went about my day trying to focus on my tasks, but constantly glancing at the clock. As noon approached, my heart pounded. Would the thief strike today? At exactly 12:15 p.m., I casually walked to the break room. The fridge door was slightly ajar. My lunch was gone. It worked. I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. I returned to my desk, struggling to concentrate. About an hour later, the office buzzed with commotion. Whispers and concerned glances circulated. I overheard snippets of conversation. Someone was in the restroom and it wasn't pretty. I knew it had to be the thief. Trying to keep a straight face, I headed to HR. I reported my stolen lunch and mentioned that it contained my prescribed medication. The HR manager, Susan, paled as I explained the medication was a potent laxative. Her eyes widened with realization. "This is serious, Alex," she said, standing up. "We need to investigate immediately." I watched as the wheels were set in motion. Susan called the security, and an investigation began. My heart pounded, but this time with a sense of justice. The thief was about to face the consequences. The office buzzed with tension, and I felt a mix of satisfaction and worry. Had I gone too far? But then I thought about all those stolen lunches and the thief's complete disregard for my property. This was justice, plain and simple. Minutes later, the security arrived, and it wasn't long before they found the culprit. It was Steve from the marketing department, and he was in bad shape. Here's what you need to know about Steve. Steve Johnson had been a fixture in the marketing department long before I joined the company. On the surface, Steve seemed like a model employee. He was always sharply dressed, with a winning smile that could charm clients and colleagues alike. He had a knack for creating compelling marketing campaigns and often received accolades for his work. To many, Steve was the golden boy of marketing, a reliable and talented professional who could do no wrong. However, beneath this polished exterior, Steve harbored a different persona. His charm and professionalism masked a more opportunistic and entitled attitude. He believed that his contributions to the company gave him certain privileges, which extended beyond what was reasonable. Steve was known for bending rules to suit his needs, a trait that many colleagues overlooked due to his undeniable success in the department. Steve had a reputation for being somewhat of a prankster, often playing harmless jokes on coworkers. At first, these pranks seemed lighthearted and added a bit of humor to the office environment, but over time, they became more intrusive and personal. Some employees whispered about how Steve's pranks occasionally crossed the line, but these concerns were often dismissed as jealousy or oversensitivity. The lunch thefts had started small. At first, Steve would take a bite or two from someone's sandwich or snag a dessert from the communal fridge. These actions went unnoticed or were brushed off as accidents. But as Steve's behavior escalated, so did the frequency and boldness of his thefts. He began taking entire meals, rationalizing that his demanding job justified these minor transgressions. In his mind, he wasn't stealing, he was merely claiming what he deserved for his hard work. Despite numerous complaints to HR, Steve managed to avoid repercussions. His charm and smooth-talking ways allowed him to downplay accusations and maintain his untarnished reputation. HR, swayed by his charisma and his impressive track record, hesitated to take decisive action against him. This leniency only emboldened Steve, reinforcing his belief that he was untouchable. Outside of work, Steve led a relatively solitary life. He enjoyed the finer things, often dining at upscale restaurants and indulging in expensive hobbies like golf and wine tasting. Yet, this lifestyle was funded by a sense of entitlement rather than genuine earning. His habit of taking from others extended beyond the workplace, seeping into his personal life and interactions, so I really could feel no remorse where he was concerned. But back to that day, Steve, aware that he had been caught, tried to put the spotlight on me. He accused me of poisoning him, his face twisted in discomfort thanks to the laxative and unfeigned anger. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "He put something in that lunch." I stayed calm, explaining to the security and HR what had happened. "The food was mine," I said firmly, "and the medication was prescribed to me. It was clearly labeled." The officers nodded, understanding the situation. Steve's discomfort was evident, and the commotion drew the attention of the entire office. Colleagues whispered and watched as the thief was led away. I remained composed, knowing I had done nothing wrong. My only crime was trying to protect my property. And finally, it seemed justice had been served. As the security and HR launched their investigation, I found myself recounting the events with a calm demeanor. I explained how my lunch had been consistently stolen, how I'd reported it numerous times, and how, out of desperation, I had followed my doctor's suggestion to include a laxative in my lunch. I emphasized that the food was mine and the medication was prescribed for a legitimate reason. The HR manager, Susan, took detailed notes while the security officers asked their questions. They inspected the fridge, interviewed my colleagues, and reviewed any available security footage. My coworkers' reactions were a mix of shock and curiosity. Some glanced at me with wonder and awe, while others whispered among themselves, probably discussing the unfolding drama. One officer approached me and said, "You did the right thing by coming forward, Alex. We can see you try to handle this through the proper channels before taking action." I nodded, relieved that they understood. The investigation continued and I could feel the tension in the air. The whole office was abuzz with speculation, but I remained focused, knowing I had done what I needed to protect my belongings. The investigation concluded swiftly. Steve, the thief, was found guilty of repeatedly stealing lunches and faced severe consequences. He was given a disciplinary notice and ultimately lost his job. The office atmosphere shifted noticeably. HR implemented stricter security measures, including new surveillance cameras in the break room and a lock on the communal fridge. My coworkers seemed more cautious and respectful, understanding the seriousness of stealing someone's lunch. For me, the sense of vindication was immense. I no longer had to worry about my lunch disappearing, and I felt a newfound sense of peace during my breaks. My actions not only protected my own property, but also brought about a positive change in the workplace. I received a few nods of approval and even a couple of thank yous from colleagues who had also suffered from missing lunches but had been too afraid to speak up. It seemed really bad that they had let Steve go, though. He was really good at his job. His marketing campaigns had brought significant revenue and recognition to the company. Some colleagues even admitted that his creative ideas would be missed. However, Steve's talent couldn't excuse his behavior. His sense of entitlement and disregard for others' property had created a toxic environment. In the end, the decision to let him go was a necessary step to restore integrity and respect in the workplace. It served as a reminder that no one is above the rules, no matter how skilled they are. With Steve gone, my daily routine became blissfully predictable again. I no longer worried about finding an empty spot where my lunch should be. Each day, I carefully placed my prepared meals in the fridge and knew they would be there when I was ready to eat. Lunchtime became a peaceful retreat, a moment to recharge without the cloud of frustration hanging over me. I could finally enjoy my turkey and avocado sandwiches in peace, savoring each bite with a relish around the break room. A few weeks after the incident, I heard that Steve's position had been filled. To my surprise, the new hire was an old friend from high school, Mike. Mike and I had lost touch over the years, but reconnecting at work was a pleasant surprise. He brought a positive energy to the office, quickly becoming a well-liked team member. With Mike around, the workplace atmosphere improved significantly. His friendly demeanor and strong work ethic set a new tone, making the office feel more like a supportive community rather than a competitive battleground. Dealing with Steve, my lunch thief was stressful and as petty as it seemed. I learned that sometimes unconventional solutions are necessary to address persistent problems. There's a certain irony in using a laxative to teach a lesson about respect, but it worked. Life at work could not be better, and even now, I can't help but chuckle at the lengths I went to protect my turkey sandwiches. So how many of us can really blame OP? I mean, let's be real. How many of us who take the time to plan a very nice lunch, a turkey and avocado sandwich, side salad, homemade apple pie, brownies? I mean, not being able to enjoy that, it kind of actually is expensive after a while because you think about the cost of the ingredients and the stuff. If HR isn't going to help you, you either switch to the spicy food, dog food, or laxative option. You try to disincentivize this person from ever wanting to try to steal your lunch again. That said, our next story is, if you try to bully me, I'll make it hard for you to find a new job. Balancing work and college without any parental support was tough enough. I didn't need anyone making it tougher, but as the story will turn out, that was exactly what Emma had in mind for me. My name is Daniel, and I'd been working at the small coffee shop in our town for a little over 3 years. My parents didn't help me financially, so this job was my lifeline. I relied on every paycheck to cover my tuition and rent. The pressure to keep up with my studies and work enough hours was overwhelming. But I was determined to graduate and build a better future for myself. The coffee shop is a cozy spot in town where everyone loves to hang out. It's always bustling with regular customers and new faces, creating a vibrant atmosphere. The place had become a second home to me and my fellow employees, most of whom were also college students. We formed a tight-knit team, supporting each other through the daily grind. Despite the busy environment, there was a sense of closeness that made the long hours more bearable. Our customers appreciated our friendly service, making it feel like a true community hub. Our manager, Emma, initially seemed professional and competent. At first glance, she appeared to run the coffee shop smoothly. However, it didn't take long to notice her manipulative side. She had a habit of nitpicking and stirring up trouble among the staff. Though she acted friendly in front of customers, behind the scenes, her true nature emerged. Emma's sly comments and power plays created a toxic atmosphere, making many of us anxious about her next move. Her behavior hinted at deeper issues that we'd soon discover. Jake joined our team for just a few months before he had to quit. He was a kind-hearted guy, always wearing a smile and eager to help. From the moment he started, he showed a genuine interest in fitting in and getting to know everyone. Jake's positive energy was infectious, and he quickly became a favorite among both the staff and customers. I remember our first conversation during a slow afternoon shift. We bonded over shared college struggles and dreams for the future. His enthusiasm was a breath of fresh air, and I appreciated having someone so positive around. We worked well together, and it seemed like Jake was settling in nicely. It didn't take long for Emma to set her sights on Jake. She seemed to relish finding new targets, and Jake's cheerful demeanor must have made him an appealing one. It started with small things like giving him the worst shifts or criticizing his work over minor mistakes. Then the rumors began. Emma whispered to customers and other employees that Jake was unreliable and lazy, even though he was one of the hardest workers. The public humiliation was the worst. One busy morning in front of a line of customers, she loudly accused Jake of messing up an order, even though it was her mistake. Jake's face turned red, and I could see the light in his eyes start to dim. Despite Emma's attacks, Jake tried to stay positive. He confided in me about his struggles, and I did my best to support him. I assured him that Emma's behavior was a reflection of her own issues, not his abilities. We brainstormed ways to improve his situation, but it seemed like Emma was always one step ahead, finding new ways to break him down. Watching Jake's morale decline was heartbreaking, and I felt helpless, unable to stop the unfair treatment. The breaking point came on a busy Saturday. Emma accused Jake of stealing tips, a serious and false allegation. She did this in front of the entire staff and several regular customers, ensuring maximum humiliation. Jake was devastated. He tried to defend himself, but Emma's mind was made up and she wouldn't listen. That night, Jake handed in his resignation. He couldn't take the constant bullying anymore. His departure left a void in the coffee shop. The atmosphere, already tense, grew even more oppressive. The remaining employees were demoralized, and I was filled with a mix of anger and sadness. Jake had been a bright spot in our daily grind, and now he was gone because of Emma's malicious behavior. It made me more determined to stand up to her, but I knew I had to be smart about it. The emotional toll of Jake's resignation was heavy, but it also strengthened my resolve to find a way to fight back against Emma's tyranny. After Jake left, guess who Emma's attention shifted to? Yeah, you guessed right, me. It felt like I had a target on my back. She started accusing me of stealing tips, the same way she had with Jake. She spread rumors that I was lazy and incompetent, which was far from the truth. Emma's constant nitpicking made every shift a nightmare. She would criticize everything I did, no matter how well I performed. One particularly bad day, Emma purposely didn't warn me that a coffee pot was boiling hot. As I reached for it, I burned my hand severely. Emma just smirked and said, "Be more careful next time, Daniel." The physical pain was intense, but the emotional toll was even worse. I felt isolated and paranoid, constantly watching my back. My work performance started to suffer, which only gave Emma more ammunition to use against me. Her hostility was relentless, and I was quickly approaching my breaking point. Emma's harassment took a serious toll on my mental health and academics. I found it hard to concentrate in class, and my grades started slipping. I was constantly anxious, dreading my shifts at the coffee shop. The stress was overwhelming, and I barely slept at night, replaying Emma's cruel words and actions in my mind. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I sat in my tiny apartment surrounded by textbooks and unpaid bills. Tears streamed down my face as I considered the possibility of dropping out of college. I felt trapped in a cycle of despair, unable to see a way out. The thought of losing my education and the future I'd worked so hard for was crushing. I knew I couldn't keep going like this, but I also couldn't let Emma win. In that moment of desperation, I realized I needed to find a way to fight back, not just for myself, but for everyone who had suffered under Emma's tyranny. It was time to take action and expose Emma for who she really was. One afternoon, as I was restocking the shelves, I overheard Emma talking to one of her friends in the back room. They didn't notice me nearby. Emma was bragging about how she'd been collecting unemployment benefits while working full-time at the coffee shop. She laughed about how easy it was to fool the system and how the extra money was helping her live comfortably. My heart raced as I listened to her blatant admission of fraud. This was the break I needed. In that moment, everything became clear. Emma's arrogance and greed would be her downfall. I knew that welfare fraud was a serious crime, and if I could gather enough evidence, I could report her anonymously. The thought of bringing her to justice gave me a renewed sense of purpose. I decided to take the risk and collect as much proof as possible to expose her lies. I started my payback the very next day. Discreetly, I took photos of the work schedule that clearly showed Emma working full-time hours. I also made copies of the shift rosters, documenting her consistent presence at the coffee shop. My phone became my best tool as I recorded conversations whenever Emma boasted about her fraudulent activities. One evening, I stayed late after closing to go through the old schedules and pay stubs. I found more evidence of Emma's deception, confirming that she'd been lying for months. I felt a surge of adrenaline each time I gathered a new piece of proof. The risks were high. If Emma caught me, she would surely find a way to get rid of me. But my determination to see her pay for her actions kept me going. Despite the fear, I knew this was the right thing to do. I double-checked all my evidence and prepared my anonymous report. The weight of my decision was heavy, but I couldn't let Emma's abuse continue. With everything in place, I took a deep breath and submitted the tip to the welfare department, detailing all the information I had collected. Now, all I could do was wait and hope that justice would be served. The day I submitted the anonymous tip was filled with a mix of fear and hope. I meticulously compiled all the evidence I had gathered. Photos of my work schedules, copies of shift rosters, and the recordings of Emma bragging about her fraud. I typed up a detailed report, including every piece of information that could help the welfare department build a case against her. My hands trembled as I hit the send button, submitting the anonymous tip online. In the days that followed, I was constantly on edge. The fear of being discovered was always in the back of my mind, but so was the hope that justice would be finally served. Every time Emma walked past me or called my name, my heart would race, thinking she might somehow know what I'd done. But I kept reminding myself that I had taken the first step towards ending her reign of terror. A few weeks later, the welfare officials arrived at the coffee shop. They walked in during a busy morning shift, asking to speak with the manager. Emma, ever the picture of confidence, sauntered over to them with her usual arrogance. She smiled and tried to charm them, confident that she could talk her way out of whatever inquiry they had. However, as the officials began to present the evidence they had received, Emma's demeanor changed. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of panic as they showed her the photos, rosters, and recordings. She tried to deny everything, but the proof was overwhelming. The officials weren't swayed by her frantic explanations and instead asked to see more records and speak with employees. The reaction among the staff and customers was a mix of shock and satisfaction. My coworkers, who had also suffered under Emma's management, exchanged glances of relief. Some of the regular customers watched in stunned silence, whispering to each other about the unfolding drama. It was a surreal moment, seeing Emma's carefully constructed facade crumble under the weight of her own lies. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope that things would get better. Emma's downfall was swift and decisive. The welfare investigation found her guilty of fraud, leading to hefty fines and a criminal record. She was immediately fired from her position as manager, and the news of her deceit spread quickly throughout the town. Emma's reputation was irreparably damaged, making it nearly impossible for her to find new employment. The legal consequences of her actions ensured that she would never again be in a position of power over others. Seeing her face the repercussions of her cruelty and dishonesty brought a sense of justice and closure to everyone she had wronged. With Emma gone, the atmosphere at the coffee shop improved dramatically. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and I could finally focus on my studies without constant stress. I continued working at the coffee shop, but now it was a much more positive environment. I managed to balance work and school, and eventually, I graduated with honors. The experience made me stronger and more determined to succeed. I moved on to a fulfilling career, leaving the toxic environment behind. The journey had been tough, but standing up for myself and others gave me the empowerment I needed to build a better future. I think we can just kind of put it this way. If you're going to be an absolutely toxic leader to the point where you're impacting the people whose lives maybe depend on the paycheck that job provides them, not only are you going to be making enemies real quick, but people who maybe they have nothing to lose are going to try to find ways to either get you fired for something you're actually doing that they can discover, or doing whatever they can to make it look that way. Who knew a coffee shop could provide that level of drama? I thought it would mostly just be Karens upset that there's nothing bigger than a venti. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.